Well, happy Friday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show. Long time no talk. It feels like it's been forever since we got to sit down and have a conversation. And yeah, by the way, I am Brian Nichols, your humble host. And today, we are going to have a great conversation digging into why we're seeing this increase in violent crime across America, specifically in your larger cities. I know I'm seeing it here in Philadelphia. And today with Larry Newman, who's joining the program, we're going to dig into not only cities like Philadelphia, but other large cities like Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Indianapolis, Orlando, Pittsburgh, and Tampa, who, according to the FBI, is skyrocketing past where it was this time back last year. So Larry joins the program not only to discuss why, in his opinion, we're seeing this happen right now, but what he would recommend as solutions that could be taken, some as simple as just judges actually enforcing the laws that are on the books instead of writing their own laws. So thank you, Larry, for joining us and offering your take. And with that being said, on to the show, Larry Newman here on The Brian Nichols Show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely, Larry. Thank you so much for joining us here on today's episode. And unfortunately, you're here to talk about some pretty down stuff, and that is everybody's been paying attention to the news. Crime has been increasing across America, specifically violent crime. Larry, it's sad because we're seeing a lot of people say, does it really have to be this way? What's causing this and what can we do about it? But before we get there, let's introduce yourself to the Brian Nichols Show audience. Larry, what got you so interested in trying to focus on, number one, crime prevention, but number two, specifically that of violent crime?
Well, I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years. The last 10, I worked in the criminal justice system as a bail bond agent. And during that time, I was a volunteer on a committee that consulted with offenders through the Missouri Probation and Parole Program. And we counseled them and helped them to not reoffend. So I've been watching this. It's been going on for a while. It's just gotten really bad in the last year. But there's one word that probably as much as anything can identify with this, and that is accountability. Currently, lack of accountability is driving this rising crime.
A lack of accountability. So let's dig into that, because a lot of people, I think, are going to look at, well, Larry, we have our law enforcement officers. Don't they have the ability to defend us when we need help? Where is the lack there?
Well, there's not a lack in law enforcement. The law enforcement is there in an emergency to help defend you and protect the citizens, and that's what law enforcement officers do. And they're really good at that, and that's their calling. They're not motivated by money because they could get a job and work somewhere else for a lot more money. But they are there to protect their citizens and their communities, their families, their friends, everybody that lives in their community. Law enforcement investigates the crime, and then they provide the evidence to the prosecutor, who in turn presents it to the judge. And law enforcement's doing everything they can to do their job correctly.
Right now, I know before we started here, I was looking over some of the stats that I got sent over from your team. Blew me away. If you look, according to the FBI data, homicides have increased nationally by 25% from 2019 to 2020. In the first quarter of 2021, the murder rate was up compared to the same time frame last year in cities including, but not limited to, yes, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Indianapolis, Orlando, Pittsburgh, and Tampa, according to data collected by the Major Cities Chiefs Association, a group of the nation's top law enforcement leaders. I'm in Philadelphia, Larry. I see it every day on the news. Tragic stories of, I think the most recent was a grandfather, 66 years old, driving his truck, just driving, not even being in the middle of a situation, getting struck by a stray bullet, and he's gone. And these are the stories we're hearing across not just cities like Philadelphia or the cities I mentioned here, but I think you're starting to see across America, looking at places like Portland or what we saw happen in Minneapolis over the past year. A lot of people, I think this has also been stemming from the defund the police mentality. Larry, do you see a connection between the two?
There's a little bit of connection. When you no longer have a penalty or any accountability for committing a crime, then there's no incentive to not commit crimes. And that sounds maybe a little simple, but when you take away the accountability, the responsibility from those people who commit crimes, they find out there's no penalty for committing a crime. So they just go about and do what they want to. When there's no penalty, bad behavior will continue and get worse. Philadelphia, you're in Philadelphia. The documented figures for Philadelphia is at the time that the jails let a large number of people out of jail in Philadelphia last year, crime immediately spiked and went almost straight up. There is a correlation. When those people find out there is no penalty and no accountability, then they're not going to follow the rules.
Larry, what have you seen in terms of a connection between COVID-19 and the increase in crime? And I ask that question because I have seen this happen here in Philadelphia as well. It seems ever since March of 2020, there has been this impending cloud of doom just hovering over Philadelphia, and it doesn't seem to be one of hope, but rather one of nothing really exciting to look forward to. As a matter of fact, a lot of people are very negative, very jaded, and we've seen people start to just give up. We're seeing the workforce go down en masse, and I think we've seen a direct impact on COVID-19 as it pertains to violent crimes increasing. What are the numbers telling you, and where are we seeing more of this happening?
Well, your city government, your county government, your local governments, when they are faced with the possibility of numerous lawsuits because someone may get COVID while they're in custody, they're going to be frantic and try to protect their community. And what they've been told is let people out of jail, get the jails empty and won't have COVID problems. Well, no, you don't have COVID problems in the jails, but now you've got crime on the streets. So the COVID issue definitely is tied to in that fashion.
It's so frustrating because you see a lot of the problems, and maybe this is where we can take this conversation, because this show, we focus a lot on solutions. And this is where it gets frustrating because you see a lot of the situations we find ourselves in, and a lot of the stuff could easily be taken care of if we were just to kind of take a step back and start to examine what we've actually put into the systems as we thought were the right answers, the right solutions. But then all of a sudden we realize how hard it is to unwind these massive government programs, these massive government entities, and to actually be able to do things effectively. And that, in this case, you look at these big cities. I mean, either you have people who are able to go out and just commit violent crime willy-nilly. I mean, you also have petty crimes just being completely ignored at this point, it seems like. And it's not calming down. And so let's turn it towards this way, Larry. What can people do? Because this is where I think a lot of people, they feel that helplessness, is they look around and they just don't know what actionable steps they can take. So Larry, what would you say are some immediate things people can do right now to make things better?
Pick up the phone and call your local legislator and tell them you're tired of what's going on. To understand what's happening and understand how to stop it, let's take a quick look at how it works. Law enforcement goes out and takes the report of a crime. They investigate. They locate the person who probably did the crime. It's called probable cause. They forward that documentation to the prosecutor. The prosecutor then decides if they are going to prosecute this case. And if they decide they're going to, then they send it to the judge. The judge reviews it. So you've got 3 levels of review. If the judge decides that there's enough evidence, then the judge will set a court date and issue a warrant. So you've got law enforcement doing their job, doing the investigating and providing that to the prosecutor. Now let's look at San Francisco. Walgreens closed their stores in San Francisco. And why? Because everybody that walked in there and they stole under $1,000 worth of merchandise walked out, and the prosecutor would not prosecute that crime. So now we've got the problem on the back of the prosecutor. Prosecutor decides he's not going to prosecute a crime. That's a violation of his oath of office. The attorney general should look at that and say, you're not doing your job. You need to get out and vote somebody else in. So then we go to the judge. So the judge gets the case. The defendant says, oh, yeah, I went and I stole all that stuff. And the judge says, okay, well, I'm going to sentence you to a year in jail, but I'm going to suspend that. And if you call your probation officer tomorrow and get set up on probation, I'll let you out today. So the defendant pleads guilty, doesn't call the probation officer, doesn't go see the probation officer. They're back out on the streets. There's been absolutely no penalty for what they've just done. So they go do it again. So it's to put a stop to this, to go back, prosecutors, judges need to start doing their job. They need to do the job that they ran for office promising that they would do, and that they get paid to do, and that they took an oath to do. Prosecute. Judges, sentence them to jail time. No probation, no patting them on the head and saying, okay, I'm going to let you out if you promise not to do it again. Until there's some pain in the penalty, it's not going to stop it.
Let me push back a little bit, because this is obviously our audience is more in the libertarian camp, so this is where their heads are at. They say, Larry, we have criminal justice issues across the board. Wouldn't that open up more issues that could lead to some really unintended negative consequences, especially the way you see a lot of people using government right now to enforce some more less than savory beliefs or actions?
Well, if you're asking how we're going to solve this problem, you're not going to solve it until you put some penalty and some pain back in the accountability process. We can discuss and have great discussions over whether this law or that law should be on the books. If you don't want to punish people for committing a crime, then take that crime off the books. Essentially, that's what the justice system, the judges, have done on their own without the legislature passing the laws to accomplish that. So get your legislator is the key. They need to clamp down on it. They're the ones that can do it. Your governor, your lieutenant governor, your senators and the legislators, they're the ones that can tell the judges, stop just letting people go. Go back to what the law says. When there's a crime, there's a penalty attached. Follow that penalty. If not, we'll go find somebody that will. You want to solve the problem, that's what it's going to take to solve the problem.
It's interesting because I think a lot of it also is about incentive structures. And you see a lot of judges, they don't fear the consequences of not following the law. And I think we're seeing a lot more of this mentality from people where it's almost this, I'm a do-good person in government, and I'm going to use government to do good, and it's my perception of what I think good is. And this is where we get into very dangerous ground, because I think this is where a lot of people have gotten very power hungry, and you're talking specifically to a lot of these judges who are just ignoring what their role is. Their role is not to be the ones writing the law. If we're going to go back to the systems that we have in place, their job is to interpret the law and make sure it's being carried out faithfully. And in this case, yeah, you're seeing the exact opposite. You're seeing not only judges turning a blind eye, but they're actually willfully, in many cases, rewriting the law. So when you're talking to your elected officials and we're trying to get them to get as incensed and upset as the normal average person, I think it is right now, especially in these cities, Larry, why do you think we're seeing a disconnect? Because I see it. I see people tired of the nonsense, and they're looking for changes, and yet we see the same people still get elected time after time, doing the same failed policies that have gotten us to where we are today. How do we stop this cycle, and it becomes this perpetual cycle from continuing onwards?
People are going to have to get out and vote. They're going to have to make their voices known, and they're going to have to stand up and say, even though it may cost me personally, I'm going to stand up for what's right, and I'm going to vote for the person that's going to do the right thing. A lot of people fear retribution from their local politicians. They fear standing up and saying something because then somebody may disagree with them. Stand up for what you know is right and voice that. Call your legislators and say, hey, we want to stop to this. We want our streets safe again. We want to be able to have our children out on the streets and not be in fear. So do what you're supposed to. There's already the law there that takes care of that. Make sure the courts enforce it. The legislature passes the laws. If the legislature doesn't want, and legislature represents us, if the legislature and the people do not want a law on the books, then it's the legislature's problem or responsibility to eliminate that law from the books. You can't just go pick what you want to. You're in violation of your oath of office. Local judges are handcuffed by the fact that they have to abide by the rules that the state Supreme Court sends down for them to follow. Lots of local judges, most of your local judges, would love to get back to doing what they know needs to be done. But they're in jeopardy of sanctions from the Supreme Court in their state. And that, now we're back to who's responsible. So it is a complicated but a simple issue.
Well, right there, it is complicated, and you say it's a simple issue, and I think, Larry, I might have a solution that is super simple, and this is the libertarian argument. I'd love to hear your thoughts to this. We see a lot of folks who will look at what we have right now in this kind of, it almost is a monopoly, right, on who can enforce what we consider to be our moral good and bads, which we've codified into laws. Would it make sense to, instead of having that in one government entity, having private policing forces based more on, like you would go out and order any other service, because then there would actually be more of an incentive, not necessarily in responding to crime, but actually going out and helping prevent crime. And then it would be not necessarily beholden to what we're seeing right now in the bureaucracy, the red tape, the politics. Instead, it becomes truly a business, because at the end of the day, if you have a private company enforcing what we consider to be our moral good, goods versus bads in terms of law, they're going to have an incentive not to argue for the criminal justice reform. They're going to have an incentive not to go and commit acts of violence on nonviolent people, but to the contrary, they also have an incentive to stop violent people from committing violent acts. So I lay that out there. Larry, what are your thoughts there?
Well, first off, I'm for anybody in the public that would love to help and provide a safety for their community. But you need to be trained. You need to be trained in the laws. I am not an advocate of turning someone loose with a firearm that's not been trained in its use. Firearms only come out in dire emergencies. And regardless of what we hear on the social media and some of the media, law enforcement is very restrained when it comes to physical action of a serious nature. That is always a last resort. The defendant, the person that you're dealing with, is the one that escalates the situation up to that level. Law enforcement is trained thoroughly to escalate only when the defendant or the subject that you're dealing with escalates that themselves. We follow that escalation of the defendant, not law enforcement escalating first. So your solution is, and for lack of a better word, is more of a vigilante type solution. And I'm not really in favor of that. We have really good law enforcement. They do an outstanding job. Do they make a mistake? It's very rare because they're so studiously trained. But yes, there's a mistake made once in a while. But always remember, law enforcement, that law enforcement officer is trained constantly in elevating the level of force based on what that defendant or the subject that they're talking to drives. That subject is the one that creates the situation for deadly force.
So let's go towards here, because I know we only have like 5 minutes or so, and I want to make sure we're giving the actionable steps. And obviously there are folks in the audience who they're going to want to learn more and want to maybe continue this conversation. So we'll include all the links obviously in the show notes afterwards. But I want to give you the platform here for the next 5 minutes or so, Larry. Let's kind of paint the picture. Where do you see the two roads going? And I think right now we are kind of in this proverbial fork in the road in America right now, kind of in the world, if we're going to be real. And I think a lot of people are starting to say, well, we're going to go one way or another. And if we're going to look at this microcosm right now of, the increase in violent crime, the decrease in the approach of funding for the police, and obviously to your argument, this is piggybacking on a lot of criminal justice reform issues. Where do you see option A, things, if they keep going this path of where things have been going, where do you see that heading versus the alternative? If things do get corrected with your solution, where do you see us going and looking like, not only from that crime statistics actually going down, especially in terms of the violent crimes, but as a nation, the temperature of the nation? Do you see that getting better?
Well, let me ask you, if someone kicks in your door while you're asleep tonight and enters your home and threatens you with a weapon, what are you going to do? You don't have time for the cops to show up because it's all going to be over by then. But I am not in favor of a vigilante or a private situation where private persons are out patrolling the streets. That's always been throughout history. That ends up in a bad situation. We have to put fear into the mind of those criminals that if they commit a crime, that the penalty is going to be severe and that they don't want that. So why this is going on, there's all kinds of ideas and thoughts as to why we're going down this road right now. But it is the wrong road. We have got to get back to law and order, which we're throwing out the window right now. We've got to get back to law and order, and we've got to make penalties severe to stop people from reoffending.
Give us a call to action then, Larry. 2022, 2024. We got elections coming up. What would you tell people? They said, go vote. What do you think we need to do in that regards?
Well, before you vote, go talk to those legislators. Go ask them the tough questions. What are you going to do about crime? What are you going to do about the penalties for people who commit crime? The laws are on the books. Why aren't you standing up for what the law says and making those penalties stiff and severe? If it says it's 10 years in Department of Corrections for killing someone, then make it that way. Right now, it's not. They might go to jail for a couple of years and be out. But those legislators have got to hear from you. You've got to ask them the tough questions. Are you going to make sure that the laws that are on the books passed by the people are enforced? If not, I'm going to look for somebody else.
All right, Larry, we'll make sure we include all of your links for people to continue the conversation in the show notes. But for the audio listener, where can they go ahead and either follow you, learn more, read more, and take a call to action?
Oh, there's a Facebook page called Keep Missouri Safe. And we try to put a lot of things on there. That's the whole purpose, keep Missouri safe. We want Missourians safe. The public needs to be safe. My personal webpage is aaawabailbonds.com, or you can go to the Missouri Alliance of Professional Bail Bond Agents, mapbba.org, to look at what we do professionally in maintaining accountability to the courts for those people who are released with a promise to appear.
Larry Newman, thank you for joining the program. Folks, if you want to go ahead again and continue the conversation as noted, well, of course, go ahead, click the artwork in the show notes. It will bring you right to not only today's episode, but all 370 plus episodes that are out here for the Brian Nichols Show, including today's episode with the transcription of the entirety of the show. So with that being said, Larry Newman, thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Brian Nichols Show.
Thank you, Brian. Had a great time.